Hey folks, this is Chandran here, and today I would like for you to meet a friend of mine. This is Wyll, better known as the Blade of the Frontiers, or my best man.
Well met.
Wyll is a hero. Not the superhero kind you might be used to watching by now, but rather a hero of an older sort. More akin to someone you might find in a Greek tale than in a Marvel movie. Or at least this Wyll is. You see, Wyll lives many lives. Sometimes he may stray from the hero's path, but one thing that is always true is that Wyll knows sacrifice, and he is willing to sacrifice himself for others. You've probably met Wyll before, but you might not have met this version of him. For in this tale, Wyll eventually strays from the path of the Warlock, but rather than fleeing from the shadows and into the light, to wander the narrow path of a paladin, swearing vows and devoting himself to a god, as seems to often be the case. Wyll will instead stay in the dusk, devoting himself only to the pursuit of helping others, without any semblance of divine protection. Hardly ever resting, tirelessly pursuing his goals, but condemning his body, and probably soul too, in the progress. It is a dark path Wyll here walks, but if the story is to have a happy ending, someone needs to tread it, and Wyll will do that if it means protecting his people. So our goal here today is to lay out this path for Wyll, specifically trying to make him into the strongest sustained two-handed damage dealer we possibly can. This is one of the builds I used to complete 90% of Act 2 without even short resting, and it has really only grown more powerful in Act 3. Spec like this, Wyll brings a lot to the table. His primary focus is on pure sustained damage, dishing out lots of very heavy hitting attacks every turn without having to spend any resources to do so, regularly clearing half the enemies in a fight in the first round, at least in the later acts. On top of the insane martial brothers, Wyll gets access to 2 counterspells on a short rest cooldown, a good selection of ritual spells, and some low-level spell slots to use for extra mobility or situationally powerful effects like Lesser Restoration. In this video, I'm going to start by going over the build itself and some suggestions for spell choices. After that, we take a look at the Illithid powers I would grab if I were you, and in the last part of the video, I'll be talking about what gear you should keep an eye out for during the game. Let's start with the build. First off, this is a respec. It works from level 6. If you're level 1 to 5, I would go pure Warlock and use the stat spread that I've outlined over here, because you won't have access to heavy armor at that point. Strength 8, Dexterity 16, Constitution 14, Intelligence 8, Wisdom 10, and Charisma 17. Just get someone to cast Mage Armor on you and you're more or less set. If you do not intend on getting any of the permanent +1 bonuses to Charisma, you should get it to an even number instead of 17, so lower it to 16 and up something else. From level 6 and onwards, we are going to go with a different stat spread. So we are going to change this around a bit, lower the Dexterity to 10, up the Constitution to 16, and up the Wisdom to 14. This allows us to have the following skills, all of the Wisdom skills, and Athletics, just because you need to put the third point somewhere. If you want to be face, you can place a few skill points in the Charisma skills, and you can go for Beguiling Influence at level 2 Warlock. For now, let's go like this. Remember, we are level 6 in a second. The first thing we're going to go for is Ranger Knight to get heavy armor. We're also getting history, but we don't care that much about that. For our Natural Explorer, we're picking Beast Tamer to get Find Familiar, to get a Raven that can blind our foes. That way we get advantage on our attacks. The abilities we already talked about, and we are on to level 2. For level 2, we are taking our first level of Warlock. For cantrips, if you're 1 to 5, I would go with Blade Ward and Eldritch Blast. When I respec, I don't care about Blade Ward anymore at this point, so I'm probably taking Mage Hand instead. If I'm going face, I'm taking Friends. And then I'm looking at Minor Illusion. If I do not have this on anyone else, I would take it here instead of Mage Hand. For subclass, the Fiend is fine. It's very thematic for Wyll, and probably what you should take if you care about that. It's also great for the first 5 levels. But later on, the Great Old one is simply stronger because of Mortal Reminder. We're not going to take enough levels in Warlock for the Fiend to become that important. So Great Old one is the stronger pick here. For the spells, you want Expeditious Retreat at any point in the game, and especially early on, Hex is great. Later on, it'll fall a little off once you get access to more reliable bonus action attacks from your feat that you're going to be picking up in a second. You should still have Hex available, it's good in certain situations. For the third level, second level of Warlock, we get a third spell, I mean. Protection from Evil and Good is what I'd take here, especially in the early parts. For Eldritch Invocations, there are a couple I'd like to call out. Agonizing Blast, we're going to take this and we're going to have this, even if we're not going to be attacking with our Eldritch Blast. It's very good in the early game, and later on it's still quite decent to have access to it. Then I would consider Beguiling Influence if I'm playing Face. I'd consider Devil's Sight if you want to be playing around with Hunger of Hadar or Darkness. This is amazing. Otherwise, it's still quite great to give Wyll some way to get Dark Vision. You can just cast it from a Hireling or Gale in the camp or something like that. So it's not that important. For the very early game, Fiendish Vigor is very strong for level 1 to 5. But at this point, I don't care about it anymore. And then lastly, Repelling Blast is strong in that it can help you manipulate the battlefield. I would probably take Agonizing Blast and, at this point, Repelling Blast or Devil's Sight. At this point, meaning level 6, of course. No need to replace any spells. And level 4, third level Warlock. My spells are going to be from 1 to 5. I'd take Cloud of Daggers here to have a good AoE spell. But at later points in the game, Misty Step is stronger. Maybe even Mirror Image. Obviously, Hold Person is good, but I prefer to cast it from someone else than Wyll. Ray of Enfeeblement is the same. It can be strong, but cast it from someone else. For Pact Boon, we are going with Pact of the Blade, obviously. Find Pact Weapon is amazing. You must remember that this allows you to be proficient with any melee weapon, so you don't have to care about what sort of two-handed weapon you're using, and you're going to be using whichever one is the best that you have access to. We do not need to replace any spells here, and we can just go on. Our 4th level Warlock will be one more cantrip. This time I'm taking Minor Illusion. And let's just grab Mirror Image here. And for the feat, importantly, we are taking Great Weapon Master. This is how we are going to be using our bonus actions later on. Any critical hits, or any time you're down a target with a melee weapon, you get to do the bonus action attack. You want to get that as often as possible, because your attacks are going to be quite strong. Second part of this is amazing as well. Melee attack bonus -5, of course, hurts, but plus 10 damage is a lot. And a lot of the build is going to be working around trying to alleviate this -5 penalty so that you still hit and get the plus 10 extra damage bonuses. So, looking for a lot of gear that gives plus attack or advantage, stuff like that. Our level 6, and this was where we are at with the respec. We're going to be taking Counterspell, because this spell is amazing and it doesn't take up any of our actions in combat. We're going to grab an Eldritch Invocation, probably just Repelling Blast. I'm going to replace one of my spells, Protection from Evil and Good, because I don't think I need it at this point, and then I'm gonna grab some other 3rd level spell just to have access to it. Hypnotic Padding is what I'm grabbing here. Could take Hunger of Hadar, or Fireball instead, as you please. Good. At this point, we do not need any more levels in Warlock, and we're going back to our Ranger. We're picking up Enhanced Leap, or you can pick whatever spells you want here. Longstrider, you should probably have someone in camp cast for you. If your Face, grab Speak with Animals. Hunter's Mark is nice, but you already have Hex, so it doesn't matter that much. It's probably still what I'm gonna take, just to be able to change between the styles. For our fighting style, I'm going to with Defense here. There's nothing that helps your two-handed fighting style, so Defense just for the extra bit of armor is quite a decent pick. 3rd level Ranger, you get the interesting choice of a subclass. There are 2 options that I would consider. The first one is a Gloomstalker Hunter. You get the extra attack in the first round, and some extra bonus to initiative and other abilities. And the second one is the Hunter, while going for Hordebreaker. This is one I'm gonna take, because the Hordebreaker melee attack is quite strong. It's more or less the same as the Gloomstalker one, but you get to get it every turn, and it's very fun to try and set it up. I think perhaps the Gloomstalker version is slightly stronger, because initiative means so much, and fights are often short enough that getting extra rounds of an extra attack doesn't mean as much as just getting to go early in the first one. But I really like setting this one off, so that's what I'm gonna go for here. 4 spells, pick whichever one you want really. I'll take Fog Cloud just to have it available for funny situations to pickpocket or stuff like that. Good. And level 4 Ranger, we get our 2nd feat, ability improvement, going into Charisma. If you haven't already switched to using Bloodlust, and you should have, Elixir of Bloodlust, now you can definitely do so. Getting +5 to hit from your Charisma is awesome. Still no need to replace any spells. And level 5 Ranger. We now get, importantly, the extra attack that stacks with the other extra attack we have. So we're now making 3 attacks per action. We also get a second level spell. I don't want to be casting in combat, so I'd probably take lesser restoration here, just to have the option in case like my cleric is paralyzed or something like that. But you do you. And replace spell, there's no reason to do any of that. For the last 2 levels, we are changing out of the classes we've been going so far and just going to fighter. This allows us to pick up great weapon fighting. And for the level 2, we are getting action surge, which is of course a very strong burst ability. With the base build out of the way, let's talk about theme for a moment, and then take a look at our choice of Illithid powers. This bit contains some spoilers if you haven't been to this point of the story yet, so viewer beware. Pausing now to give people a chance to skip. 1, 2, 3, here we go. Thematically, at a certain point early in Act 3, depending on your choices, Wyll could be out of his Hell Pact, or at the very least he might be so soon. But another avenue of power has just opened up, and if you want your team of heroes to have the best possible chance of saving the world, someone should probably lean into it. For this build, Wyll is that someone. This fits remarkably well with changing his subclass from Fiend to Great Old One, tentacles being the main through line here. Wyll does require a little bit of convincing to accept this fate, but the reasoning you can supply is right down his alley. It truly is a tragic thing for Wyll to get out of his Hell Pact and immediately offer up his body to another gruesome fate. But at least this way his soul should still, theoretically, be intact. And I love Wyll, but he really doesn't strike me as the kind to learn from his mistakes. So with the theme sorted, let's look at what this transformation offers Wyll for his build. I've set up Wyll as my partial Illithid, he's the only one who's done it, and that is specifically to get access to fly, because flying around the battlefield and even out of combat is simply amazing, especially for a melee build like this. Call the Weak is also very impressive. If you've invested a lot of Illithid powers, getting to last hit stuff for an extra 20 hit points of damage is very strong, especially when you can spread out your attacks and you have so many like you do with this build. So this can mean a lot of extra damage per round. Same goes for favorable beginnings. The first attack roll or ability check you make against any target gains a bonus equal to your proficiency bonus. So if you spread out your attacks, this is going to be realistically like half of your attacks, except in certain boss fights where you want to wail all on the same character for a long while. +4 to most of your attacks is obviously a great thing for a build like this. There are a couple of other abilities that are less offensively oriented that I'd like to call out. Charm is great for defense against extra attack. Psionic Dominance is an extra counterspell, sort of a personal counterspell. It may be blocked combined with Disguise Self. I'm not entirely certain how that works at the moment. And then of course there are a lot of once per long rest, once per short rest abilities that are very strong, but are not specifically suited for this sort of build. Stuff like Perilous Stakes, Free Cast, Mind Sanctuary, Mind Blast, and other stuff. And that should be it for the build part of this video, so now we can get on to the items. For the itemization throughout the game, there are really a couple of different categories that I want to cover. First, I want to get advantage from somewhere. If I can't get it via items, I try and get it via summons or spells or something from other people, but there are some items that can do that. I'd like to get extra bonuses to attack, extra bonuses to damage, some sort of mobility to get to the position where I need to go, the best weapon that I can find at any given time, and then some items so that my defenses do not fall too far behind. At the point where I'm capturing this, I'm using items that you can find sort of like in the beginning of Act 3, so these are the items I would be wearing at that point. You can pick them up around the city from vendors or steal them from chests or something like that, and none of them you need to fight a certain boss for. So I'd like to go over those first, and then afterwards I'd take a look at some of the ones I would be using earlier throughout the game. Not an extensive list, of course, because you're going to be using a lot of items throughout the game, but a spattering of different ones to make like a representative set or something like that. First, here for the helmet, +2 bonus to attack rolls, initiative rolls, and perception checks. This is a bonus to my attack rolls, it's awesome. For my cloak, it's some sort of defense, disadvantage on attacks against me until they've hit me once. More defense in my armor. There's nothing really strong offensively for this slot, and the resistance from this one is very strong. It's not +1d4, it's +4 for Wyll specifically at this point. I think it might be a proficiency Check. And Blade Ward at the top doesn't do much because I have Warding Bond. Legacy of the Masters, another +2 bonus to attack, and this time a little damage as well. Boots of Arcane Bolstering, this does nothing like what it says it does, but it does trigger on dash, but the Arcane Charge, instead of giving you +1 bonus to damage with spells while you're threatened, which is bad, it gives you plus your proficiency bonus to damage to people you are threatening with any sort of damage. So it works with your melee weapons as long as you're threatening someone, which you will be if you're attacking them. For my necklace, I'm using Broodmother's Revenge from Act 1. 1d6 extra poison damage whenever I've been healed within the last couple of turns is amazing, since I always start combat by healing my people with a potion to trigger certain other effects that I'll get into a bit later. For the ring here, this is my how to get advantage. At this point in the game, this is like the best way to get it in the game. It also gives you a disadvantage on saving throws, but because we have something like Armor of Persistence, the disadvantage on saving throws is not as bad. We're also using this one that gives us advantage on certain saving throws already, so that sort of cancels each other out and makes it not as bad as of a disadvantage. For my second ring, Strength Conduit Ring, plus 1d4 psychic damage when concentrating on a spell, and I'm always concentrating on Expeditious Retreat at this point of the game. And then for my ranged weapon, I have the Bow of the Banshee. There are other options here, but this one is great. On a hit, possibly inflict frighten. This does nothing, but gain a plus 1d4 bonus to attack and damage against frightened creatures. This part of it works whether you're using the bow or not, so it works even when you're attacking with your melee sword. And since you spread frightened on a crit, you quite often gain another plus 1d4 bonus to attack and damage as well against these creatures, so that's amazing. And then lastly, of course, we have the weapon that I've been using since Act 1. You can get this in Act 1. It has like a 16% chance to... you can make Commander Voss drop it by commanding him to drop it, or you can disarm him, or something like that. I explained how in my previous Wyll build video, the one for level 5. So if you want to get a guide on that, you can just watch that one. It's quite simple. If you are not lucky enough to get it, your 16% roll, and you don't want to save scum, there are some other options, of course. But they are all very subpar to this sword, because it's freaking amazing. Good. For the items I've been using throughout the game, I'm just gonna run through some of them quickly. For advantage, and I was using these gloves for most of the game. Glove of the Growling Underdog. The wearer gains advantage on melee attack rolls while surrounded by 2 or more foes. Surrounded is quite loose, you just have to be nearby 2 or more foes, and this is an amazing way to get advantage. If you don't have the Sword of the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane, you can go for something like Unseen Menace. This weapon is invisible while equipped. It loses its property for 2 rounds on a missed attack roll. The fact that it's invisible means that you have advantage when attacking with it on stuff that cannot see invisibility. That's most of it. So, another good way to get advantage here. If you're not using any of these items or the risky ring, you should very much focus on getting Fairy Fire on people or any other way to get advantage. Raven Blind that we spec'd into with our familiar here is quite good. There are other nice summons. Mod methods can do a mod spray that restrains. So get it somehow, you really want advantage. That's the short version of it. For bonus to attack stuff, it comes a little bit later into the game. There are the dexterity gloves in Act 1, but those also give +1 to attack rolls. But you probably have someone who can use it better than a heavy armor user. But the Swordmaster gloves are an example, as is the Circlet of Hunting, and this is very strong. It does require some setup though, plus 1d4 bonus to attack rolls against creatures marked by Hunter's Mark, True Strike, Fairy Fire, and Guiding Bolt. Hunter's Mark you can do yourself, so whenever you Hunter's Mark something, you'll get an extra bonus to attack against them. That's one option. Editing Chandron here. It's worth calling out that there are actually some early game items that gives a bonus to attack, specifically the ones that grant lightning charges, which is +1 bonus to attack rolls and a little extra damage as well. The Speedy Light feats are a good example. When the wearer dashes or takes a similar action during combat, they gain 3 lightning charges. This means you would have to go for Expeditious Retreat instead of using Hex, so it's a trade-off that you might not be willing to take. I never used them on Wyll early on, but that was primarily because I had someone else using them instead. Regardless, that should not stop you from enjoying them, in case you want to, so let's add them to the pile of good examples of items that give bonus to attack here. For a little extra damage, Caustic Band is early on. I've been using that for a while. Lord Hilda's gloves. There are a couple of these gloves that gives bonus to your damage while you're attacking with a weapon. If you're not using gloves of the Growling Underdog, you could consider slapping a pair of these on. And then obviously there's something like the Dead Shot later on you could go for instead of the bow that I've equipped now, but that's rather late game. I'm using this on another character. That's one of the reasons I'm not using it here. Also, I really like the synergy, and I prefer the extra bonus to hit on this character specifically from the Bow of the Banshee. Crusher's Ring is something good for mobility that I was using early on, and to be honest, I was using it for more of the game than I'd care to admit, because the plus 10 feet extra movement just means that you don't have to really worry about not being able to get somewhere. Combine it with Longstrider, obviously. You should always have Longstrider on all of your characters. It's free, just get it. And yeah, you can get quite far. I used Boots of Speed for a while. This is just an expeditious retreat that does not require concentration, which means you have your concentration over for stuff like Hex or Hunter's Mark, whatever else you want to be using it for. These are great, and until I got these Boots of the Arcane Bowstring, I was basically using Boots of Speed all the game. And then very early on you have something like the Haste Helm for a little extra movement in the beginning of the combat, but you get something stronger than this quite earlier. I'm gonna jump over the weapons for just a second here, and I'm going to some of the defensive items. It's just a spattering of different ones. From level 1 to 5, you cannot use any real armor, to be honest. So one thing you could do is to go for Mage Armor plus 16 dex, as I talked about in the build section, and then equip something like Braces of Defense for an extra +2, and then you're already at 18. Get Warding Bond, 19, and then if you please, you could get Shield of Faith from either a weapon, that I'll talk about in a second, or from your Cleric, if you have one of those. And then you could get all the way to 21 armor class, which is quite amazing for DPS builds in the very early game. So that's an option. You have something like Flawed Hilda's Helmet later on, +2 bonus to saving throws against spells. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for concentration saves, but it's still very strong. The Constitution saving throws bonus +1 that the helmet itself has actually does work, so that's just even better. Very strong defensive item. Grimskull Helm is also an option. Attackers can't land critical hits on the wearer, and you get an extra Hunter Mark in case that matters to you. Mostly the critical hits part was the relevant one here, and I think I'd take the Flawed Hilda's over it as soon as I get to that. I also have the Dwarven Splint Mail here, just for, as I mentioned, of a good armor class because of the extra constitution you get from it. Good. That should be about it. For weapons, if you're not using either Silver Sword of the Astral Plane or the Unseen Menace, there could be something like Soulbreaker Greatsword, which is sort of like the little brother of the Silver Sword. And it's a good one. Extra bonus damage. You get a lot through Act 2 as well, where you get a little bit of extra damage on your attack of some sort or another. Sometimes with a clause that something has to happen first. As soon as you get to something with a weapon enchantment of +2, if you're not using the Silver Sword, of course, you should probably upgrade to that. Very early on, there's also a couple of different choices. Everburn Blade is fine. It's not as great as people give it credit for. It lacks the +1 enhancement bonus, which actually means a lot, especially once you get to level 4 and get Great Weapon Master. Being able to hit the thresholds for decent to hit chance with the +10 extra damage is quite nice, and this doesn't help towards that. Very Hurt Great Axe, I like this one for the on short cooldown AoE attack here, the Gargantuan Cleave. It's very strong, but it's on a short rest cooldown, so not that impressive. And then we have the Sword of Justice here. If you're not using your Hex too much in the early game and want something a little bit more defensive, you can supply your own Shield of Faith here. Good. Those are a spattering of different items you can find throughout the game. There's obviously a lot more that would work into this. Just remember the categories that I laid out earlier and focus on those. With focus being on get an archer somewhere, get your hit up, then make sure your damage are something worth. You also need to be able to hit, get to your target, so some mobility. And lastly, a bit of defense so you don't get slapped in the face too often. That should be about it and should cover your itemization throughout the game. Before we end the video entirely, there are two more things I'd like to go over. The first is that since we are using the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane, we obviously have to be a Gith somehow. Both of its special effects are tied up in you being a Gith. To do this, you can either use the Disguise Self spell, or you can equip Mask of the Shapeshifter. Use Shapeshift. Turn yourself into a Gith. It does require you to get used to looking at Wyll like this, but it also covers up the partial Ceramorphosis. And then lastly, you can simply re-equip your old helmet. You'll still be in the Gith form. This triggers the effects of the Silver Sword of the Astral Plane, and you're good to go. The second thing I'd like to talk about, and for that I am jumping over to Shadowheart here. I would very much suggest you have one of your characters equipped with the Whispering Promise Ring. When you heal a creature, it gains a +1 d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws for 2 turns. This is just a bless effect, and it's very easy to trigger. Just drop any potion on the ground, nearby whomever. You can even place it in between characters, that's what I usually do, and then use one attack or whatever to shoot it. I have specifically equipped Shadowheart with double hand crossbow, even though she doesn't really use them for anything else than this. Now we have Bless on Wyll, and a little extra bonus to attack. So get into a habit of doing that at the start of every combat, and you'll both activate his necklace and get the Bless effect. It's definitely worth it. Editing Chandran here again. I completely forgot to mention 2 items that I definitely need to mention, so let's do that now. First off, the Elixir of Bloodlust. Drink to enter Bloodlust. Once per turn when you kill a foe, you gain 5 temporary hit points and an additional action. The temporary hit points are whatever, but the additional action is insane. So always be using this elixir. At least from level 5 once you get your extra attack. Until then you might be better off with an elixir of Hill Giant Strength. The other item is the Transmuter Stone. In order to get this, create a hireling, level 6 Transmuter Wizard, and craft one of these and give it to Wyll. Just put it in his inventory, and he will have proficiency in Constitution saving throws. It doesn't show up right now, because I've just respec'd him. But if I transfer it to another character, and back, it should get into effect here. As you can see, +4 from proficiency to your Constitution saves, which means to your concentration saves. And you do want that. So remember these items. Keep them, use them, get them, etc. That should be it for this video. Thank you for joining if you have been. I've been Chandran, and you've most definitely been awesome. Do not forget to do the YouTube stuff, and bye-bye. So, this one took even longer to get out than the last one, but at least at this point my wrist is almost fixed. I'm no longer ill, and I should be able to keep up a slightly better schedule at least than I have been. Or at least I hope so. Bye-bye.